Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well this evening, and welcome back to tonight's second half. Before we get into it, a couple links. As you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, and my merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. The links to Patreon and PayPal are in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Not Only. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, the links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support this channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It's absolutely free. Click that like button and please leave a comment. It really does help, and guys, it definitely matters. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's get on with tonight's second half, shall we? Alright guys, I still am going to apologize. There is no improvement. Still burning up. Still feel like crap. I apologize for being off this evening. And believe me, I know you guys are going to be like, it doesn't matter. You know, get rest, this and that. It does matter to me, because I feel like I should be giving you guys 100% every day. So, thank you for understanding.
Earlier today, I received an email with one of the most interesting, terrifying, and tragic encounters. When I read it, I was stopped dead in my tracks. I immediately contacted a couple of people that I knew, and, well, this is the encounter. I'll share with you guys a couple of things that I learned and a theory. I'm a wife of someone who had an experience with something at one of the worst possible times in his life. It was April of 1994. We had just come out of a terrible winter. We had the worst ice storm earlier that year that caused such damage and power outages in our area. Needless to say, by the time April got here, my husband went fishing with his buddy in a small creek that leads to a small river. Always good fishing there. My husband's dad was a commercial fisherman, and this was one of his favorite spots to drop his nets. Anyway, the guys fished until mid-afternoon, and after running the battery down on the trolling motor, they headed back to the truck. Well, when they arrived, who would be there waiting on them but my husband's dad? His dad had been wanting to go fish ever since the weather warmed up, but during the ice storm he had fallen and broken his hip while tending to the cows. He had told my husband on several occasions, "Let's go fishing." But for whatever the reason, my husband couldn't go. Well, when my husband knew what his dad was wanting when they pulled up, he wanted to go fishing. He told him that the battery was dead, but no, it didn't matter. He wanted to take the boat down the creek, and he said it'd be okay. No matter what my husband tried to talk him out of going, his dad was going anyway. So my husband let him take the boat. You don't refuse a man like his dad. So my husband and his friends left and came home. Fast forward to 9:30, we get a call from my husband's mom. Dad hasn't come home. He jumps up and heads back where he had left his dad beside the creek. He called his buddy that he had fished with him earlier that day, and they both went to get his dad. When they got to the creek, the boat was not there. Everything was as it was when he left. They started walking down the edge of the creek, yelling for Pa. They went a mile to the mouth of the creek where it dumps into the river. It was pitch black, and the flashlights only reached a short distance when they heard a buzzing sound, like an insect, but not like an insect they had ever heard before. They stopped and yelled for Pa again. Then they saw, on the other side of the river, two sets of very large, red, almond-shaped eyes. At first, my husband thought they were deer. Standing and watching, When they flashed their lights toward the creek, they saw the boat on the far side of the creek. This might be confusing, but the creek meets the small river like a T. The eyes were on the right top of the T, and the boat was on the bottom left side of the T. The creek was too deep and too wide to cross, and my husband didn't swim well. So they ran back to the road by the truck and crossed the bridge and ran back down to where the boat was. When they got there, the eyes were still on the other side of the river. And floating by the boat was Pa. They jumped into the boat and pulled him in, but he was dead. They did CPR, but he was gone. They grabbed the paddle and a garden hoe that was in the boat and tried to paddle back to the truck. At first, they hadn't realized the boat was not tied off. It was just sitting there. They started to try to paddle, and they kept hitting something under the water. But that can't be. It's 15 to 20 feet deep where they were. But what were they hitting? Something, and it was jerking at the paddle and the hoe like it was trying to jerk it out of their hands. They were so freaked out, they had found Pa dead. Big red eyes, jerking the paddle. It's a demon, and it's trying to get us as well. That's what my husband's friend said. My husband screamed, "Come on, you son of a bitch. You got him, but you're not getting us." My husband's friend was scared and tried to shut my husband up, but he told his friend, "Don't be afraid." Then it stopped. They were able to get the boat moving. They were not hitting anything under the water. The paddle and the hoe was not being jerked. On the way back, one of my husband's cousins had shown up on a four-wheeler, so they sent him to go and call rescue. When they finally got back to the truck at the bridge, rescue had just arrived. After 10 years later, we had a Bigfoot researcher go with us to the spot where this happened. I had seen something on one of those Bigfoot hunting shows that made me think about the eyes they saw that night. This was the first time my husband had been back since that terrible night. He realized then that the boat had not been tied off, and the creek and river had significant current, that the boat and his dad should have floated down the river, but didn't. And where the eyes were, it couldn't have been a deer. The eyes were much too large and too high off the ground. So what actually happened that night, we will never know, but my husband said if it hadn't been for the buzzing sound, they wouldn't have found the boat as soon as they did. So did the creature with the red eyes cause his dad's death? We don't know. Could they have been watching over him until he was found? We don't know that either. We do know that his dad spent a lot of time in those woods, there and on the creek and river. So they could have known him. He could have known them. Oh, by the way, he was Native American. He was not scared of anything but respected all. I know this is a very personal story, but it changed my husband forever. He won't fish or hunt anymore, and he doesn't want to be out in the woods. I wish I could get my husband back. Thank you for letting me tell his story, our story. Here's a little bit of extra information. I should have given you more location in my letter about my husband's encounter. This happened in West Tennessee in a small farming community called Crockett County, on a small creek called Cypress Creek that dumps into a small river called Forked Deer River between 54 and Highway 152. We used to live 1 mile from the creek on 152 and had lots of scary things like hearing breathing next to our house, and just a creepy feeling that you didn't want to be outside after dark. At the time, I didn't know what was going on, but when X-Files the series was on, there was an episode called The Detour, and a creature in the show had red eyes. And when my husband saw that, he screamed at me. That's what I saw. Needless to say, that was the last time he watched X-Files. That got me researching, then finding Bigfoot started, so I eventually called them started asking questions about the eyes. That was who the investigator was from, Finding Bigfoot. I just realized I didn't tell you the medical examiner ruled the father-in-law's death as an accidental drowning. There was no outward trauma to his body. I always thought after healing from a broken hip when he fell into the water, he could have had a blood clot, causing a heart attack. Also, my husband never told anyone else except me about what really happened for fear of ridicule. He was a businessman in a neighboring small town, and we all know how rednecks can be. So his friends, myself, and himself and me were the only ones that knew what happened that night. He did give me permission to tell the story to Finding Bigfoot, BFRO, and they sent a lady investigator from Nashville. She was very nice and understanding about the case. Her findings, as well as my story, is the only one in Crockett County, Tennessee. She contacted me sometime later and wanted to put us on a show, but my husband said no, for fear of the small-town syndrome. I'd like to thank this subscriber for reaching out and sharing her husband's very personal, tragic, and terrifying experience. I honestly cannot blame him for not wanting to go back into the woods, whether it be to hunt, hike, or fish, especially after such a loss of such magnitude as a parent, your dad. I honestly have my own view. I did share with her via email. I think it was a werewolf. I think it was mistaken identity. You have to remember that just because Finding Bigfoot BFRO investigator, yeah, it's a lot of fancy schmancy lingo, but they're just like us, you know. They have a love for this. Chances are they have no anthropology, archaeology degree, no forensic background, no tracking background, just a will to listen to an encounter and write it down, and then to make their opinion. I honestly talked to Victor today and shared this with him, and he told me that in '94, in that area, there were two calls from the DNR. And one was the very first part of May. So like the first couple of days of May and then the last couple of days of May. They went out, they found some large footprints out by 152, and there were claws, a set of claws attached to those large footprints, which in my eyes eliminates Bigfoot and Dogman. Only leaves one thing, the werewolf. So I'm going to reach out to the subscriber. I have her phone number, I have her email, and share what Victor shared with me. Just very, very simple what I just said. And you know, I don't want to discredit or disprove anyone. You know, like I said, we all have this love, but when the facts are there, they're there. This woman came in a couple years later, you know, and went to the spot. The teams went in a couple of days after and found tracks within that area 2 different times. It doesn't mean that, and Victor said the same thing to me. He goes, we weren't called in because of this death. We were called in by the DNR because of sightings that were made. There was a sighting of one running across 152. So I'm just going to leave it at that. It's a very, very tragic encounter. And, wow. So, thank you for reaching out to me and sharing it with me. I'd like someday possibly to have you on and, remain completely anonymous and just talk about it if you're willing. But I understand if you're not too. So now let's get into some encounters from up my way. The Adirondacks, Washington County, July 2000. My wife and I were off the trail to take some photos since she works as a model and I wanted to get some pictures of her by a creek. There was one small Volvo or Audi parked on the trailhead when we went into the trail and signed the login registration. We had been at the location for about 30 minutes when we heard a very deep sound, almost roaring sound coming from a very large mammal. I'm an experienced backpacker and had years of experience in Boy Scouts and have had many encounters with bear, and on occasion have had to take food bags away from a very large bear that stole a hiker's food near an avalanche pass in the high peaks. I've heard bobcat and coy dog, and this was no animal that I had ever heard, including a possible Bigfoot sighting I had nearly 10 years ago. The sound was so distinct, so low, almost a cross between a scream and a growling sound. I had never heard anything like that in my life. It made the hair stand on the back of my neck. I have never been so frightened in my life. I tried to keep my cool with my wife, who frightens easily. The sound came closer and closer and was coming from the other side of the creek from the trail. It makes this blood-curdling scream yell at least 7 times as it approached us, and at one point it was about 25 feet away. As it came through the woods, we could hear large branches breaking and could tell it was starting to circle us. The sound stops, but we could just feel it looking at us. We were in total fear, and we quickly gathered our things, ran down the trail. The whole time we could hear this very large animal tracking us to our right side, along the creek. Washington County, November 1999. My family and I have owned property in Dresden, New York area off Route 22, a few miles north of Whitehall, since the early 60s. Last year, when I sold the property located on Blue Goose Road, Route 22. Back in '99, while deer hunting off of Pike Brook Road in the Black Mountain area, I viewed some very strange tracks in the mud on a logging road, and suddenly an awful, foul smell was in the area. It was a damp, still early November day. Thinking back, it may have been election day. The time was around 8 in the morning. I was hiking up a logging road. The smell drifted away as quickly as I smelled it, but it was distinct. I've never smelled anything like it since. And I have been with hunters that took the Adirondack bear, and this odor was different. It actually raised the hairs on the back of my neck. It was a definitely strange smell. The tracks were sort of foot-like, but very wide. The toe area was mushed in the mud, so it was difficult to determine if there were claws like a bear or any other type of distinguishing features. In retrospect, I should have reported this immediately, but the only person I told was my wife and a few hunting buddies. No one completely dismissed my story, but it was like, oh, that's something, but I know I smelled and sensed it. Definitely gave me the creeps. Now, where he is talking about Dresden is very creepy. It's a very small northern part of Washington County. It's about 30 minutes away. And when I was young, I worked for a landscaping company, and there was an old hotel called the Dresden Hotel. A lady owned it herself and converted it into her home. She lived on the tracks, and then just beyond the tracks was inlet to Lake Champlain, which, if you're do your crypto research, in New York, Lake Champlain is the home of Champ, which is the American Nessie. So, needless to say, we're mowing this huge field down for this woman, 2 Kubota mowers. And the whole time I was there, it was just the creepiest feeling I ever got. You've got this hill with this creepy old hotel, kind of looked like the Bates Manor, but bigger. All this woods around you, an old railroad track that I don't think they use anymore, and the Lake Champlain. It was just the creepiest place. And there is a shit ton of areas like that up where I live. But it's so beautiful. I mean, it's picturesque, but creepy. I apologize for that little break-in. Back to some encounters. Washington County, January of 1989. We saw footprints while walking in the woods that must have been 20 inches long and found some tree branches broken down. They were originally about 15 feet high. We decided to head back to his house right away because we both felt as we were being watched and it was close to dark. The entire way home, we felt it's like we were being followed. Then, the next morning, I awoke and saw a large creature about 20 feet from our house. I slept on the front fold-out couch, and the entire front of the house was windows. Must have been at least 10 feet tall, as the windows are 15 feet off the ground, and it was no more than 5 feet below me. It wandered around for a while, and I didn't dare move. It was brown and looked very human except for the size and forehead, and obviously the hair. After about 5 minutes, it walked toward the house and up a bank. As it passed the house, it banged on the wall, and I thought its arm would come right through. My friend was awakened by this and came in, and I told him what I had just seen. We decided not to go back out and follow the tracks. Today's final part of the upload is a sample of Dogman Frightening Encounters Volume 3. I know quite a few folks who have had Sasquatch sightings, but I saw something else, something that was undoubtedly twisted and malicious. My instincts demanded that I get away from this thing as quickly as possible. And I feel very fortunate to be alive to tell my story. My entire life I lived on Vancouver Island, and if you've ever been, I bet you know what I'm talking about when I say it has a mysterious energy. For many people in the area, cryptids are as real as any other animal. It's a simple fact that they roam the wild. Of course, it's not as if you can just walk outside of your house and expect to spot one. Your chances of seeing anything like that are still incredibly rare. I know only one other individual who claims to have seen a Dogman, and according to them, it's a demon in physical form. This event happened back in 2016. I was 23 at the time. I went through a phase where I was into walking through the woods while sipping a cup of coffee and smoking a joint. By the way, I should mention that I had my sighting before I even had a chance to light the joint. For a little under a year, this routine was like a ritual that I would do before I began working on my online classes. I was studying to become a psychologist. And the combination of caffeine and THC was highly effective for helping me focus on my assignments. However, I hadn't even had a chance to light the joint before a very strange being appeared. I remember it was lightly raining, and I was looking for a patch of dry soil that indicated there was enough shelter from the trees above. I eventually found a good spot near one of the regular locations I'd like to sit and relax at. It consisted of a pond and a good number of logs. It was as I had just begun to sit on one of the logs that the sight of something brought me to a halt. A very large creature stood directly across the pond, tending to its long ears. I immediately noticed that it was using a hand rather than a paw to seemingly remove some burrs or something irritating from the back of its left ear. The ears were very pointed, didn't flop at all. I mention that because what I saw aligns with the descriptions in so many other reports. The ears were very long and stood straight up. I can't go as far as to say that its body was just like a man's, but it was standing on two legs when it appeared. However, the lower legs were shaped differently than what people say they saw. It was covered in hair, and the color matched that of a typical coyote. I get what people are saying when they say these things appear very strong. Its upper arms and upper legs were both very wide, and its shoulders were extremely broad. It couldn't have been more than a couple of seconds before I realized it was looking directly at me. There was no question that it was analyzing whether I was something that it should kill and eat. Next, something incredibly bizarre happened. It growled at me, but it wasn't very loud at all. Still, I could feel my organs vibrate, almost hum from the noise of this thing. It instantly became clear that this was no average animal with normal capabilities. It was powerful in every sense, and I knew I was totally at its mercy. It was as I was trying to decide whether I should start running in the opposite direction that I watched the creature swoop its large arm down into the pond and grabbed a sizable turtle and raised it towards its dog-like snout so that it could bite off a large chunk. Its jaws had no trouble crushing the protective shell of this helpless animal. It then turned and walked off in a motion that reminded me of a character of Gollum from Lord of the Rings. When it was no longer in sight, I continued to stand there for a few minutes, trying to decide whether all of that had really just happened. To this day, I'm convinced that if that amphibian hadn't been available for the creature, I likely would have died. I don't know why, but while I looked upon that beast, I got the impression that it had killed multiple people. Once I made it back home, I almost couldn't believe that I was still in one piece. Honestly, it felt like a miracle. It was as if I had come face to face with the devil and lived to tell a tale. I wouldn't call myself a religious person, but I am convinced I crossed paths with something that was filled with foul energy. It was because of that incident that I had obtained a new sense of gratitude for life. Some people experience PTSD following their encounter with a cryptid, but I truly feel as though I gained something of value. Before that day, I was never all that interested in Sasquatch or Dogman, but the confirmation of the Dogman's existence gave birth to a fascination for both creatures. I now read all of the affiliated literature that I can get my hands on. Of course, I don't feel as though I can speak for the Sasquatch species, but the Dogman species is not something to be taken lightly. If you ever come across one, I think it's best that you try to remain as calm and composed as possible. They are absolutely at the very tippy top of the food chain. So do your best to refrain from presenting yourself as prey. I sincerely appreciate you taking the time to read my report.
Well, I hope you all enjoyed today's second half as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. I'd like to thank you all for all of your support. It truly means the world to me. Please, everyone, stay safe, stay healthy, and may the Great Spirit watch over us all and guide us down that path we call life.